The laughter hit me before the translation implant finished its work. 473 representatives. 473 species. 473 different ways of producing sound, vocal cords, air sacs, mandible clicks, bioluminescent pulses translated through diplomatic hardware. And every single one of them found a reason to laugh at the exact same moment. It rolled through the grand assembly of the Galactic Conclave like a physical wave. Loud. Layered. Bouncing off walls so high that weather patterns formed near the vaulted ceiling. Real clouds. I had been briefed about that. The building was so enormous that it generated its own microclimate. I stood at the podium alone. My name is Devon Cale. I am 37 years old. I hold a doctorate in xenopolitical strategy from the University of Cape Town and a scar across my right palm from a childhood encounter with a broken bottle I should not have picked up. I mention these things because the beings laughing at me did not know any of them. To the Galactic Conclave, I was not a person. I was a representative of a species that had wandered into the wrong room. I kept my hands flat on the podium. I did not look away. I had spent 4 years preparing for this moment. I had studied conclave protocol until I dreamed in procedural subclauses. I had learned to read the posture of 11 different species, the angle of a Thranxy antenna cluster, the color shifts of a Silthus dermal layer, the breathing patterns of a forelag during active listening. I had practiced my delivery in Galactic Standard until my accent was indistinguishable from a native speaker's. I had done everything right. It did not matter. The forelag ambassador spoke before I could finish my second sentence. His name was Counselor Threx. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, with a segmented exoskeleton the color of deep ocean water that caught the chamber's light like polished armor. He had interrupted me with a raised claw, in forelag culture, the equivalent of a dismissive wave. His translation chip rendered his words into crisp, precise English, the conclave's language of record. "The delegate from Earth," he said, pausing to let the title hang in the air like something unpleasant, "has stated that her species deserves full conclave membership on the grounds of technological advancement, cultural continuity, and, I want to ensure I have this correct, demonstrated capacity for interspecies cooperation." He turned to the chamber then. Slowly, making sure every representative was watching. "A species," Threx continued, "that has engaged in organized, species-wide armed conflict for approximately 87% of its recorded history is presenting itself as a model of interspecies cooperation." That was when the laughter started. It did not sting the way people might imagine. It did not make me feel small or humiliated. What it did was clarify something. Something I had suspected but not fully confirmed until that exact moment. They had not read our file. Not properly. They had skimmed the summary, seen the wars, and stopped reading. They had never looked at what came after the wars. They had never examined what we built while we were fighting. I waited for the laughter to thin. It took almost 2 minutes. I counted. When the chamber quieted enough for my voice to carry, I spoke. "Counselor Threx is correct." My voice was steady. Humanity has a long history of internal conflict. We do not hide this. We included it in our application because we believe honest disclosure is more valuable than a curated record. Threx tilted his head. Not curiosity. It was the forelag equivalent of rolling one's eyes. "The membership committee's recommendation," he said, producing a datapad from beneath his ceremonial robe, "is as follows. Earth's application for full conclave membership is declined. Grounds: insufficient interstellar presence, unresolved planetary security concerns, and a military doctrine classified as," he paused, mandibles shifting into what the translation chip rendered as amusement, "strategically unpredictable." He set the datapad down. "There is also an addendum," he added. "The committee suggests that Earth may reapply in 300 standard cycles, when its species has had sufficient time to mature." The laughter came again. Louder this time. I looked out at those 473 faces. The long and the flat. The scaled and the furred. The ones with too many eyes and the ones with none at all. And I did something I had planned very carefully. I smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a nervous smile. The kind of smile that means I know something you do not. Then I bowed. A single deliberate bow. Then I turned and walked out of the Grand Assembly. I did not look back. I did not hurry. Behind me, the laughter continued. I walked through the corridor that led to the diplomatic docking bay. The walls were made of a transparent composite that showed the stars outside in real time. I could see the black between systems. I could see the nothing. My ship was waiting. A small diplomatic vessel. Earth-built. Single crew. With a jump drive that the Conclave's docking officials had politely and firmly described as adequate for local travel. One of them had actually patted my shoulder while saying it. I boarded. Sealed the hatch. Sat in the pilot's seat. Pulled up my communication log. There was a message from Director Horace Venn. Venn was the woman who had sent me here. She was 58 years old, soft-spoken, and absolutely relentless in the way only patient people can be. Her message was short, as her messages always were. She had sent it before my session even began. If the vote goes wrong, come straight home. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone. Just come home. I read it twice. Then I pulled up the secondary display. The one that showed sensor data from the space around the Conclave station. I looked at what was not there. At the readings that were absent. At the signatures that should have shown up and did not. Behind me, 473 representatives were still laughing. None of them were looking at their sensors. None of them were looking at the dark between the stars where something very large was about to arrive. I set a course for Earth and engaged the drive. Ship's log. Day 5 of transit. I am recording this because I need to think aloud and there is no one else to listen. My name is Devon Cale, and I have just been laughed out of the most powerful political body in the known galaxy. I am flying home at maximum speed because Director Venn told me to, and because I do not want to be in that region of space any longer than necessary. Let me tell you what the Conclave does not know about us. I mean that seriously. Step by step. Because they have made a very large and very consequential mistake. They just do not know it yet. The Conclave's intelligence report on Earth was 34 years old. I discovered this during the pre-session briefing. A Conclave aide, polite, young, visibly uncomfortable, handed me a printed summary and quietly mentioned that the most recent data had been gathered during a survey mission in 2076. I am writing this in 2110. I did the math while he was still speaking. 34 years. The Conclave had not updated their file on humanity because updating it had never seemed urgent enough to bother with. Think about what that means. 34 years ago, Earth had 12 functioning interstellar vessels. We were proud of them. They were slow, expensive, and named after ancient explorers. The Conclave looked at those 12 ships, calculated our expansion rate, and concluded that Earth would remain a minor presence for at least 3 centuries. That was a reasonable conclusion. In 2076. What happened after 2076 is the part they did not read. In 2078, the Chung drive was completed. Not the prototype, the production model. The one that reduced jump time by a factor of 14. The Conclave sensors picked up the energy signature and logged it as increased civilian research activity. They were not wrong. Technically, the Chung drive was developed by a civilian team at a university in Shanghai. What the report failed to note was that the same team had been receiving funding from 11 different defense agencies simultaneously, and that the moment the drive was completed, those agencies had very specific plans for what to do with it. In 2082, the silent forges were opened. I need to explain the silent forges because they are important, and because almost no one on Earth knew they existed. They are located in the Kuiper Belt, positioned in such a way that they face away from any direction the Conclave survey drones typically approach from. They were not secret because we were afraid of being caught. They were quiet because humans, when we are building something we are very serious about, do not make announcements. We make plans. Then we execute the plans. Then we show people what we made. I grew up knowing nothing about the silent forges. Most people on Earth did not. They employed about 62,000 people directly, and each of those 62,000 had signed agreements enforced with a kind of legal weight that made people very careful about what they said at dinner parties. What I know now, because Director Venn told me before I left, is that the silent forges have been operational for 28 years. I know what they have been building. I know how many. I know the names, because the naming committee for this program had the same poetic sensibility as the one that named the early survey ships. Except this time, instead of explorers, they used battles. Every ship is named after a battle that humans lost. I thought about that for a long time when Ven told me. It seemed like an odd choice. You might expect a military program of this scale to name its vessels after victories, triumphs, turning points, heroic stands. But no. Every ship in that fleet carries the name of a defeat, a retreat, a last stand that did not hold. When I asked Ven why, she thought for a moment and then said, "Because we remember them. And because remembering them is why we built this." I did not fully understand that at the time. I think I do now. Counselor Threx stood in front of nearly 500 representatives of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations and told them that humanity had been at war with itself for 87% of its recorded history. He meant it as an insult. He meant it to provoke laughter. And it did. What he did not understand, what none of them understood, is that 87% of our recorded history spent at war is not a mark of barbarism. It is a curriculum. 10,000 years of applied research into how to move forces, how to supply them, how to maintain morale under pressure, how to adapt tactics when the situation changes, how to absorb catastrophic losses and continue functioning, how to build faster than the enemy can destroy. The galaxy has had peace for so long that its members have forgotten what organisms shaped by war actually look like. They looked at us and saw a species that had not yet grown up. They did not look closely enough to notice that we had already survived everything. Every disease, every collapse, every catastrophe that should have ended us. We came through it all. And every time, we built something stronger on the other side. Not because we are special. Because we are stubborn in a way that borders on unreasonable. And because we have had 10,000 years of practice at surviving things that should have finished us. I pulled up the footage from the conclave chamber on my ship's display. I scrubbed through until I found the moment Threx interrupted me. I watched his mandibles shift into that shape I recognized as amusement. I marked the timestamp. I made a note next to it. He will remember this differently. I do not say that with anger. I say it with the calm certainty that comes from knowing something the other person does not yet know. On my secondary display, I pulled up a map of human space. The real one. Not the one in the Conclave's 34-year-old file. The one that showed where we actually were now. The one with all the installations and outposts and relay stations. And in the region near the Kuiper Belt, a cluster of signals that were not labeled on any public chart. I looked at it for a while. Then I looked at Director Ven's message again. Just come home. I have been chosen for this mission because I am good at reading rooms and better at not reacting when I should not react. Ven had told me that directly, 6 months ago, when she explained exactly what the conclave session was and was not expected to accomplish. You are not going there to win a vote, she said. You are going there to stand in that room, be dismissed, and come home with your dignity intact. The vote doesn't matter. Then what does? I had asked. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who had been carrying a very large secret for a very long time and had become accustomed to its weight. Time, she said. The vote buys us 8 more weeks. That's all we need. I had not asked what would happen in 8 weeks. I had not needed to. I turned off the display showing the conclave chamber. I set the autopilot and leaned back in my seat. 8 weeks. The universe is very old. Humans are very new to it. But new does not mean unprepared. And young does not mean weak. It means we have had to fight for everything we have from the very beginning. And that we have never once stopped building. Not during the wars. Not after them. Not even when the rest of the galaxy decided we were not worth the time it would take to update a file. Somewhere behind me, the Grand Assembly was still full of laughter. Somewhere ahead of me, in the dark near the Kuiper Belt, 62,000 people were working the night shift. The stars moved past the viewport. I closed my eyes. Admiral Sereth of the Forlag 7th Fleet had commanded warships for 47 years. He had participated in 17 border disputes, 3 full-scale engagements, and 1 incident that diplomatic channels still referred to as the misunderstanding. He had seen species rise and fall. He had watched empires expand and contract like breathing. He believed he understood the calculus of power. He was wrong. The conclave session had ended well, by his calculation. The human delegation, a single small female, unarmed, unaccompanied, had been processed through the membership committee and turned away without incident. Sareth had delivered the rejection personally, not because protocol required it, but because he wanted the dismissal to be unambiguous. The human had smiled at him as she left. He had found that smile irritating. He had not found it alarming. That was his first mistake. 3 days after the session, his communications officer brought him a report from the Border Observation Network. It was flagged low priority, which was why it took 3 days to reach his desk. The report noted unusual mass signatures near the outer edge of human space, readings that did not correspond to any registered vessel class, moving in a direction consistent with deep space transit. Sareth read the report. He noted that the observation network was not fully calibrated in that sector. He wrote "sensor calibration error" at the bottom, signed it, and returned it. That was his second mistake. On the 5th day, a routine update from the Border Patrol fleet included a note that Patrol Vessel 9 had not filed its scheduled check-in. Sareth authorized a standard follow-up inquiry. On the 7th day, Patrol Vessel 9 was still silent. On the 8th day, Patrol Vessel 3 also stopped responding. Sareth stood in his command center, looking at the map of the border region, and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not fear. A sharpening. The kind that comes before fear, the way a drop in temperature comes before a storm. "Lieutenant," he said, "have we received any traffic from human communication networks in the past 48 hours? His communications officer checked his instruments. He took a moment longer than expected. "No, Admiral. Human channels have been quiet. No diplomatic traffic. No commercial broadcasts. No emergency signals. Nothing. Nothing." Sareth walked to the primary sensor station. He looked at the display himself. The border region appeared quiet. The 2 missing patrol vessels were marked with amber indicators, inactive, unknown status. The space around them showed nothing. "Run an active sweep," he said. "An active sweep will reveal our position, Admiral." "I am aware." "Run it." The sweep took 90 seconds. It showed the outer marches in clear detail, the planets, the dust clouds, the gravitational signatures of the local star. It showed the coordinates where patrol vessels 3 and 9 were supposed to be. It showed nothing in those coordinates. Not wreckage. Not debris. Not emergency buoys. Nothing. They had not been destroyed. They had been removed. When a ship is destroyed in space, it leaves evidence. Destroyed things create fragments. Even vaporization leaves ionized residue. The signature of destruction is unmistakable, and it lingers. But where Sareth's patrol vessels should have been, he saw clean space. Undisturbed space. Space that had not experienced any energetic event in recent history. His ships had simply ceased to exist. "Admiral," his communications officer said, voice carefully neutral, "I am receiving a partial signal from the relay station at the border threshold. Put it through." The relay station's automated signal was designed to report large mass signatures entering detection range. It transmitted in flat-coded pulses, one for each object detected. The signal coming through was not calm. It was rapid, continuous, so many pulses stacked together that the officer's terminal had difficulty parsing them individually. "How many?" Sareth asked. His officer looked at his screen. He looked for a long time without speaking. "Lieutenant, how many objects is the relay station reporting?" "It is still counting, Admiral. The detection threshold was designed for standard traffic volumes. It appears to be overwhelmed." Sareth looked at the main display. The map of the outer marches. The space between his fleet and the edge of human territory. He opened a channel to the Conclave's emergency line, reserved for genuine crisis, for things requiring immediate collective attention. He had used it twice in his career. He had hoped not to use it again. "This is Admiral Sareth of the Forlag 7th Fleet," he said. "I am reporting a possible large-scale human military movement near the border threshold. I am requesting conclave assessment and mediation." The response came from a duty officer, a junior administrator working the overnight shift. His voice carried the particular tone of someone woken from routine by an inconvenient call. "Admiral Sareth, can you confirm the nature of the threat?" I cannot confirm the nature. I can confirm the scale. There was a pause. The duty officer was pulling up something on his terminal. Admiral, our records indicate that the human delegate was dismissed from a conclave session 11 days ago. Is it possible this is related to, I want to phrase this carefully, some kind of protest action? A demonstration. Patrol Vessel 3 and Patrol Vessel 9 have been missing for 5 days, Sareth said. They did not broadcast distress signals. They did not send emergency messages. They simply ceased reporting. The relay station at the border threshold is currently transmitting a mass detection signal that my communications officer cannot parse because there are too many objects for the station to count individually. I do not believe this is a protest. Another pause. I will escalate the report, Admiral. Sareth closed the channel. He stood in his command center, breathing slowly. The relay station signal was still coming through. His officer had configured his terminal to display a running count. The number was climbing. Still climbing. Admiral, said a technician from the sensor station. I am reading something on the passive sensors. Very large. Moving slowly. Multiple objects. They are not broadcasting identification. Sareth walked to the viewport. Viewports on military vessels are ceremonial, a tradition from an earlier era. But he walked to it anyway because 47 years of command had taught him that sometimes you need to use your own eyes. He looked out at the stars. On the port side, between his vessel and the distant light of the system's star, the stars were going dark. One by one. Not blinking out. Not dying. Simply being covered by something very large passing between him and them. The darkness spread slowly. Steadily. Something was out there. And it was blocking the stars with its eyes. Vin, Sareth said, his voice steadier than he felt. What is the estimated mass of the objects on our port side? The technician worked his instruments for several seconds. When he answered, he did not look up. The calculation is still processing, Admiral. The mass signature is larger than anything in our reference database. The computer is having difficulty classifying it because it does not have a comparable example. Sareth kept looking out the viewport. The darkness kept spreading. The stars kept disappearing, one by one, in a long slow arc across his horizon. He thought about the human delegate standing at the podium in the Grand Assembly. About nearly 500 beings laughing at a single small woman with her hands flat on the podium and her expression completely calm. He thought about the way she had smiled before she left. He reached for the communication panel. All vessels. Go to full readiness. This is not a drill. Outside the viewport, the last star on his port side went dark. The ship was called Thermopylae. It was 4 kilometers long and massed more than some small moons. Its hull was made of an alloy that did not have a common name because it had not existed until 9 years ago, when the materials team at the Silent Forges invented it specifically for this program. The ship was named after a mountain pass in ancient Greece where a small force had held back an army so large it took 3 days to march past. They had not survived the battle. But the battle had bought enough time for everything that came after. Director Venn had chosen the name personally. I boarded the Thermopylae 6 weeks after the conclave session, 3 days after returning from my diplomatic mission. Venn met me at the airlock. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, not the synthesized kind, and handed me one without a word. We walked to the bridge together. I saw the fleet through the ship's external cameras as we pulled away from Jupiter's shadow. I want to describe what it looked like, but I am not sure I have the right words. Imagine a city. Now give the city engines. Now multiply that city by 5,000 and spread it across the dark between planets in a formation so precise it looked drawn rather than arranged. 5,047 vessels. That was the final count. Each one named after a battle we had lost. Each one crewed by people who had trained for between 4 and 15 years for a mission most of them had never been told the full details of until 48 hours before departure. When I told them where we were going and why, no one fainted. No one refused. One engineer raised her hand and asked if she could send a message to her family before we left. I told her yes. She nodded and wrote something in her notebook. That was the end of the meeting. That is the thing about people who have been training seriously for years. They do not panic at the news they have been training for. They get quiet. They get focused. They check their equipment. They send messages to their families. And they show up on time. We arrived at the conclave station at 8:47 station time on a Thursday. The council had called an emergency session 2 days earlier in response to Admiral Saratha's communications. The session was being held in the secondary chamber, smaller than the Grand Assembly, but still large enough to hold 300 representatives, which was roughly how many had managed to assemble on short notice. We dropped out of dark transit in a staggered sequence. Not all at once, which would have been dramatic, but in groups of 50, spread across 12 minutes. Each new group appearing on their sensors was a new confirmation that the number was real. By the time the last ships arrived, the conclave chamber had been completely silent for 6 minutes. I opened a channel to the full council. Members of the Galactic Conclave. My name is Commander Devon Cale, representing the United Earth Space Command. We are not here to begin a conflict. We are not here with threats or ultimatums. We are here because it is important that this council understand, clearly and without ambiguity, what a conflict with humanity would require. I paused for 3 seconds. I had planned the pause. The fleet you are currently reading on your sensors represents 28 years of continuous construction. It is fully operational. It is fully crewed. Every vessel carries the name of a battle we lost, because we believe it is important to remember the cost of being unprepared. Another pause. We would like this to be a conversation. The response took 53 seconds to arrive, approximately 45 seconds longer than normal communication lag. That gap represented, I believed, a significant amount of internal debate happening in a very short period of time. When the response came, it was Councillor Threx. His voice was different from the one I remembered. The amusement was gone. Something else had replaced it, not fear, exactly, but a careful, controlled quality. The voice of someone measuring every word. Commander Cale. The Conclave acknowledges your communication. We request that your fleet maintain its current position while we assess the situation. Of course. We have no plans to move. We are happy to wait. The Conclave will need time to. We understand. Take all the time you need. We are very patient. I closed the channel. Over the next 8 hours, we received 67 separate communication requests. Forlag Military Command. Thallery Diplomatic Corps. Representatives from 17 species I had never heard of, each wanting to clarify our intentions. A journalist who asked for an interview. And a brief formal message from a conclave administrator asking whether our fleet required any supplies. I replied to the journalist that now was not the right time. I replied to the administrator that we were self-sufficient. That was the most diplomatic way I could think of to say that we had brought enough supplies for 3 years and had no intention of needing the conclave's help for anything. On the 9th hour, I received a message from Captain Elena Cross of the destroyer EDS Canny, positioned 20,000 kilometers ahead of the main fleet as a forward observer. Commander. The Forlag have a military group in Sector 4 that is requesting we withdraw from our current position. Tell them we have received their request. Should I say we will comply? No. Just tell them we received it. A pause. Understood. 3 hours after that, the Forlag military commander formally requested that Earth's fleet demonstrate its intentions by reducing its forward posture. He called it a gesture of mutual restraint. I called a meeting with my senior officers. We discussed the request for approximately 4 minutes. Then I had Captain Cross relay a counter-proposal. Earth would demonstrate its intentions through a technical display instead of a withdrawal. We would select an uninhabited target, confirmed lifeless, no scientific value. We would conduct one demonstration of approximately 30 seconds. Then we would open the conversation about membership. The Forlag commander asked for clarification on what we meant by technical display. I had Cross tell him that he would find out shortly. I signaled Captain Priya Sharma of the EDS Little Bighorn and Captain Marcus Webb of the EDS Stalingrad, both destroyers. Not the largest ships in the fleet, but among the best armed. I had chosen them specifically because they were not the biggest. I wanted the conclave to understand that what they were about to see was not our maximum capacity. It was an average demonstration. The target was a small rocky body in the outer system. Catalogued. Confirmed lifeless. Approximately 9 kilometers across. Sharma and Webb had 14 seconds to perform the engagement. They used 11. What had been a 9-kilometer rock became, in 11 seconds, a spreading cloud of superheated particles that glowed briefly on sensor displays like a new star being born, and then faded into the dark. I watched the feed on my display. Then I watched the conclave chamber feed. The chamber was absolutely silent. 300 representatives sat in perfect stillness, staring at their screens. I let them sit with it for 1 full minute. Then I opened the channel again. The Council may have noticed that the demonstration involved 2 destroyers. We have 312 destroyers in this fleet. We also have other vessel classifications, but I want to be careful not to overwhelm the meeting agenda. I let that sit for a moment. Earth's membership application was filed 4 years ago. The documentation is complete. The references are in order. We believe the committee has had sufficient time to review our materials. I paused for exactly 3 seconds. We would like a revote. 6 weeks. That was how long it took. 6 weeks from the day the Thermopylae dropped out of dark transit outside the conclave station to the day I walked back into the Grand Assembly and took a seat at the long curved table that circled the chamber floor. Not at the podium this time. At the table. In the chair that had been officially designated as Earth's seat by a vote that, when it was finally called, was unanimous. Let me tell you about those 6 weeks. Because they were not simple, and they were not quiet, and because the story of how the vote was won matters more than the vote itself. The Forlag were the first to move. Not militarily. Their military had done a thorough assessment and reached the same conclusion any military reaches when it looks at a force it cannot match. They went quiet. In their place, 3 days after the demonstration, I received a formal communication from a Forlag diplomatic office I had never heard of. The diplomat spoke very carefully and asked very reasonable questions about Earth's long-term intentions. I had a team of 8 diplomats with me on the Thermopylae. I put them on the Forlag channel and told them to be thorough and unhurried. The Thalari were more interesting. Counselor Soren, a being whose species communicated partly through color shifts in translucent skin, had been one of the few representatives who had not laughed during my original session. I had noticed this at the time. 3 days after the demonstration, I received a private message from Soren. I would like to speak with you without an official record. Is that possible? I replied that it was. Soren was approximately 80 years old by human counting, young for a Thalari. He had been a counselor for only 15 years and had spent most of that time reading the history of species that had been dismissed before they were ready. He had a long list of them. There is a pattern, he told me. The conclave dismisses species it finds inconvenient. Not dangerous. Inconvenient. Species that ask complicated questions. Species that don't fit neatly into existing structures. Usually, they accept the dismissal and go away. You did not go away. No, we did not. He paused. His skin shifted to a quiet, thoughtful blue. When you walked out of this chamber the first time, did you know the fleet was already moving? I looked at him through the camera feed. Yes. How long had it been planned? The fleet has been in preparation for 28 years. The diplomatic mission to the conclave was planned in coordination with the fleet's deployment schedule. My appearance at the session was, among other things, a timing mechanism. Soren was quiet for a moment. You were never trying to win the vote that day. No. I was buying time for the fleet to reach its position. That, he said, his skin shifting to something I had not seen before, a deep, even amber, is the most sophisticated piece of political strategy one have witnessed in my 15 years on this council. He told me he would support the membership application and would speak privately with 5 other counselors he believed could be moved. He asked for nothing in return. When I expressed surprise, he said, I am not doing this for Earth. I am doing this because a conclave that laughs at species it has not bothered to understand will eventually make a mistake it cannot recover from. Having Earth at the table makes this conclave less likely to make that mistake. That was the most useful thing anyone said to me during those 6 weeks. The formal negotiation process took the rest of the time. My diplomatic team handled most of it: documents, hearings, subcommittee reviews. The fleet remained in position throughout, unhurried, maintaining its coordinates with the kind of patient steadiness that very large, very well-supplied military forces can maintain indefinitely. No one asked us to move again after the third week. Councillor Threx did not participate in the formal process. His office submitted a written statement supporting the application, required by voting procedure. The statement was brief and contained no direct reference to the events of the past 6 weeks. I read it once, noted its absence of any personal tone, and moved on. On the day of the vote, the Grand Assembly was full. All 473 seats occupied. I did not know if they had come because the vote was important or because they wanted to see what would happen. Either way, it did not matter. I sat at the table. The vote was conducted by the conclave's administrator, a small, quiet being who managed the procedural elements with the efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. Each member recorded their vote through their terminal. The results were displayed on the central column that rose from the middle of the table. Unanimous. All 473 in favor. The chamber was quiet after the result was displayed. Not the silence of shock. The silence of something settling into place. I sat at the table and looked at the central column and thought about the first time I had stood at the podium in this room. 473 beings laughing at me. The way I had counted my steps on the way out because counting kept my breathing even. A young Thallery delegate came to find me after the session ended. She was junior, clearly still learning protocols, but she had the directness of someone who had decided to ask before she thought too hard about whether she should. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." We always assumed that a civilization builds itself first, its culture, its infrastructure, its presence, and then builds its defense capability as it expands. That is the standard model. The conclave uses it to assess new species. I know. Your species did not follow that model. You built both at the same time. 4 decades. In secret. She paused. When did it start? The real program. Not the diplomatic one. I thought about how to answer. I thought about Director Venn and the Silent Forges and 62,000 people who had worked for 28 years without making announcements. I thought about the ships named after battles we lost. I thought about the first time someone had looked at us and laughed. I think, I said slowly, it started the first time someone looked down at us and decided we were not worth paying attention to. She considered this. That is a very long time to be patient. Yes, I agreed. We are very good at it. She thanked me and left. I sat at the table alone for a while after that. Chamber staff moved around the edges of the room, resetting terminals, collecting documents. No one spoke to me. I was glad of the quiet. A message arrived from the Thermopylae. Not from Director Venn. Her messages came through diplomatic channels and took longer to route. This came direct. Command channel. 3 words. Keep the fleet warm. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, just to confirm that it really was only 3 words. No follow-up. No policy explanation. No accompanying documentation. Just 3 words delivered through the fastest communication channel available. I thought about the 4-lag diplomatic team my people were still talking to. The 300 representatives who had sat in the emergency chamber watching a 9-kilometer rock become light and heat in 11 seconds. Soren and his quiet amber skin and his 15 years of watching the conclave dismiss species it found inconvenient. I thought about the 473 seats in the Grand Assembly that had 1 hour ago all registered the same answer. And I thought about how the universe is a very large place with a very long memory, and about how the beings in it have a tendency to judge newcomers by the smallest version of themselves they can find, and about how sometimes the best response to that is not an argument or a protest or even a fleet, but simply the willingness to wait until the moment is exactly right. I put my hand flat on the table, the same way I had put my hands flat on the podium the first time I stood in this room, and felt the solid weight of it. The physical fact of a chair that now belonged to us. A table we had earned the right to sit at. I sent a reply to the Thermopylae. 2 words. Already done. Then I looked out across the empty amphitheater. 473 seats. Clouds near the ceiling. Light coming through panels designed to mimic the look of open sky. And I permitted myself one moment of something I had been careful not to show for 6 weeks. Something that had no translation in Galactic Standard and no diplomatic use at all. I smiled. Just once. 1 year after the vote. The Grand Assembly of the Galactic Conclave had changed. Not physically. The walls still rose to impossible heights, clouds still formed near the ceiling, the light panels still mimicked open sky. But the atmosphere was different. Quieter. More careful. The representatives who walked these corridors now glanced at the human delegation with something that was not quite fear and not quite respect, but an unsettled mixture of both. I walked those corridors every day. My office was small, deliberately so. I had chosen the smallest office offered, in the least prominent corridor, because I wanted the other representatives to find me when they needed me, not the other way around. They found me often. Counselor Soren visited twice a week. We drank tea together, Thallery tea, which tasted like smoke and honey and something I could not name, and discussed the ongoing work of integrating Earth's diplomatic corps into the Conclave's existing structures. He had become something like a friend. Neither of us used that word, but neither of us denied it. Counselor Threx avoided me. That was fine. I had not come to make friends with everyone. The fleet had returned to human space 6 months after the vote. Not because the Conclave requested it, no one had dared to ask, but because Director Venn had decided that a permanent military presence near the Conclave station would be counterproductive to long-term relationship goals. Her words. The fleet had withdrawn in good order, maintaining formation all the way back to the Silent Forges, where 62,000 people continued their work. But the fleet was not gone. Everyone knew that. Everyone knew the ships could return. Everyone knew the Silent Forges were still operational. Everyone knew that the 6 weeks it had taken the fleet to arrive the first time could become 4 weeks, then 2, then something too short to measure. Human technology did not stop improving. That was another thing the Conclave had learned. I received a message from Director Venn on the anniversary of the vote. It was longer than her usual messages, almost a full paragraph. You have done well. The Conclave is adjusting. Some of them are even beginning to understand what we are. Not all. Not most. But enough. The real work starts now. Membership is not an ending. It is a beginning. Stay patient. Stay watchful. And drink the Thallery tea. It is good for your immune system. I read it twice. Then I saved it to my personal archive, where I kept all her messages. The young Thallery delegate who had asked me about the fleet, her name was Thessa, had been promoted. She worked in the membership committee now, reviewing applications from species I had never heard of. She came to my office one afternoon, looking troubled. Commander Kale, may I ask you something? Of course. We have a new application. A species called the Veth. Their file is complicated. They have a history of internal conflict. Longer than yours, actually. The committee is inclined to dismiss them. I looked at her for a long moment. Why are you telling me this? Because I read their file. Properly. Not the summary. And I think the committee is making a mistake. She paused. I thought you might understand. I did understand. I understood completely. What do they need? I asked. Thessa's skin shifted to a hopeful shade of green. Time, I think. Time to prepare. Time to build. Time to show the Conclave what they are capable of becoming. I thought about the Thermopylae. About the Silent Forges. About 62,000 people working in the dark. About Director Venn's 3 words, keep the fleet warm. Then give them time, I said. And while you are giving them time, send someone to their system. Not a diplomat. Someone who will actually listen. Someone who will come back and tell the committee the truth, not the summary. Thessa nodded slowly. That is how it started for you, isn't it? Someone listening. No, I said. That is how it continued. It started much earlier than that. She left. I finished my tea. That evening, I walked to the observation deck of the Conclave station, a vast transparent dome that looked out into the black between stars. The fleet was not there. The space was empty. But I knew, with the same certainty I had known when I stood at the podium and smiled at 473 laughing representatives, that the empty space was not empty at all. Something was out there. Something was always out there. Not a threat. Not anymore. A promise. The promise that humanity would never again be caught unprepared. That no one would ever laugh at us without consequence. That the ships named after lost battles would never be forgotten, and would never need to be rebuilt from scratch. I thought about the vote. The unanimous vote. The way the chamber had gone quiet when the results were displayed. The way Soren's skin had shifted to that deep, even amber. The way Thessa had looked at me when she asked if I understood. I thought about the first time I had stood at the podium. The laughter. The way I had counted my steps on the way out. I laughed now. Just once. Quietly. Not because anything was funny. Because everything had turned out exactly as planned. And because no one, not the Forlag, not the Thallery, not the 473 representatives who had voted in favor, no one knew how many ships were still being built in the dark near Jupiter. No one needed to know. The conclave had given us a seat at the table. That was enough. For now. But the silent forges were still operating. The 62,000 were still working. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a fleet that had never been deployed was waiting. Not for war. For the next time someone looked at humanity and decided we were not worth paying attention to. Because that time would come. It always did. And when it did, we would be ready. I turned away from the observation deck and walked back to my small office. The corridors were quiet. The clouds near the ceiling drifted slowly, catching the light from panels designed to mimic open sky. I had a meeting in the morning. A species called the Veth needed an advocate. Someone who would listen. Someone who would tell the committee the truth. Someone who understood what it felt like to be laughed at. I understood. I would be there. The story of Earth's membership in the Galactic Conclave is not a story about fleets or weapons or demonstrations of power. It is a story about patience. About preparation. About the willingness to wait until the moment is exactly right, and then to act. The universe is very old. Humans are very new to it. But new does not mean unprepared. And young does not mean weak. It means we have had to fight for everything we have. And that we have never once stopped building. The Conclave learned that. Now the rest of the galaxy is learning it too. One species at a time.